Welcome back. Will this be the week Governor Evers makes his decision about a third term? Now, reports last week suggesting Governor Evers had made a decision not to run and would announce it within 24 to 36 hours. That proved to be wrong. Instead, other state Dems said he would announce his decision in the next week to 10 days. Well, as of now, there are two Republican candidates in the race, Washington County Executive Josh Schoemann and Whitefish Bay businessman Bill Berrien, who already has a $400,000 ad buy in the state. But the political map continues to evolve in purple Wisconsin, and non-presidential elections tend to be much different, especially in the Donald Trump era of politics. So whoever is in the race, the current governor included, will have to navigate those nuances. And we welcome in Craig Gilbert, of course, a fellow at the MU Law School Lubar Center for Public Policy Research and Civic Education. Of course, a longtime political writer with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. With that recent piece, Craig, that came out towards the end of last week, you broke down where things kind of stand for both parties in the state of Wisconsin. And as we head into 2026, which is pretty important around here in the state, I wanted to take a look at some of these numbers. So let's start on the Democratic side. You've noted over the last 14 years, there's been a 9-point swing statewide for Dems. They were a +4 when it started. They're now -4. That's a big swing, but has it been gradual little hacks at that have got us to this point?
Yeah, and we're talking about, how people identify by party. So this is based on polling. 14 years of polling, and Democrats used to have the advantage, and now they're disadvantaged. But one thing to keep in mind is that shift in party ID isn't uniform across the public. It is pronounced among blue-collar voters, white blue-collar voters, and particularly white blue-collar men. So by the same token, you're going to see it, geographically, you're going to see the shift in, many places in northern, central, and western Wisconsin, but not so much in the big metro areas of Milwaukee, Madison, and then, the most populous parts of the northeast of the Green Bay market.
Some of those little shifts, though, have taken place around Milwaukee. We've talked about it many times. It's the erosion. So let's take a look at this from the GOP side as we're going to talk about the governor's race here. The GOP side with that, erosion in the suburbs, lower turnout in non-presidential elections, things like that. How do you think that's going to impact the GOP candidates for governor and how they attack this race?
Well, so, we got a midterm election. Some of the things I wrote about in this piece are kind of big sort of structural forces where, the parties' coalitions have changed, the parties have realigned. Democrats now do better among more educated, frequent turnout voters, and Republicans do better among a lot of voters who turn out more sporadically. So in a midterm election, it could be some advantage for Democrats because, you're not talking about everybody voting. You're talking about a lower than presidential turnout. But the other big factor in a midterm is cyclical. And that is, typically the party of the president, struggles in midterms. And we have a long history in Wisconsin of, in governor's races, the party that wins the governor's race is the party that's out of power in Washington. It doesn't happen every time, but that does, is kind of an underlying advantage for Democrats, going into this midterm cycle. I think it gives them, certainly a plausible chance to win for governor and win at least one, if not both, chambers of the legislature.
You mentioned the governors and the out of White House party. 8 of the last 9, you pointed out in your story, governor races have been won by the candidate, not part of the party that is currently in the White House. How does all this work if, in fact, Tony Evers makes this decision, says he's not going to run? You've got a big field of potential candidates for the Dems who need to introduce themselves on a statewide basis when the statewide basis doesn't favor that party. So I guess let's take, for example, if it's Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley. What do you think the strategy is for someone like that who isn't well known out of their own pocket?
Yeah, so there's obviously, the need to win a Democratic primary, and then there's the need, if you do win the Democratic primary, to be a strong general election candidate. And you can win a Democratic primary, based on a regional, power base, whether it's Milwaukee or Madison and Dane County. It's a little harder to do if your power base is from outside those two areas, because those are the two places that have the most Democratic voters. But, the bigger challenge, obviously, the ultimate challenge is in the fall. And so if you're a Democrat who happens to be a so-called Milwaukee Democrat or a so-called Madison Democrat, then you do have, I think, a challenge when it comes to making yourself known and, building your appeal in other parts of the state where your party has been faring poorly in this era. And that includes, again, northern Wisconsin, western Wisconsin, many of the sort of smaller, more rural stretches of the state. That's where, the challenge is. And that's where Tony Evers, actually did okay.
Right.
I mean, he did well enough to get elected twice.
Yeah, it's interesting to note, and I want to ask you about this with Evers. I'm not going to ask you what you think he's going to do because nobody knows, and hopefully we'll find out soon. But that most recent Marquette poll, with 55% responding saying they don't want him to seek a third term, is that at all concerning? Because in your article, you pointed out that in 5 of the last 7 statewide, the marquee races, governor, Senate, president, 5 of those 7 have been won by a candidate who didn't even get 50% of the popular vote. So should 55% concern anybody?
Well, it's a concern. I think it's a challenge to win a third term. I mean, it hasn't happened.
Right.
Only one governor has served more than 8 years in Wisconsin, and Tommy Thompson is the only one who's won more than 2 4-year terms. So it's a challenge. You get voter fatigue. You have big partisan swings in the country, and as a result, big partisan swings in the state. I don't think that number by itself is disqualifying, because when you frame the question that way, it's not necessarily going to reflect, the actual support that person enjoys. I mean, Scott Walker, when we asked the same question for him, when he was approaching a third term, his numbers were actually worse, and he still almost won re-election. I mean, he only lost that 2018 election to Tony Evers by about a point. So I don't think it means that he's going to finish with 44% of the vote. I think it means that it just reflects the fact that there is just a challenge when it comes to winning 3 terms in a row in a very competitive state.
All right, we'll see if he's part of that competition. Perhaps we'll have an answer by the end of this week. Who knows? Craig, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much for the knowledge.
Absolutely, anytime.